This sound isn't the Guardians from Halo, and it certainly gets a bit of attention, but this is the sound of the weirdest car I've ever tested. It's the Nissan X-Trail e-Power. Now, what the hell is e-Power? E-Power simply means this is an electric car that's powered by a petrol motor. But you're wondering, isn't that just a normal petrol electric hybrid? Well, no, this 3-cylinder turbocharged petrol motor is not connected to the wheels directly. This engine is not connected to the wheels at all. Instead, it acts as a petrol generator to power up a small battery on board and also send power directly to 2 electric motors, one at the front and one at the rear, making this an all-wheel drive SUV. But what's the point of doing all of this and having a relatively complicated setup for a hybrid car? Well, just like every hybrid car, it's to save fuel. But a slight issue is that if you want the maximum amount of performance from this motor and you want that petrol motor to perform with maximum amount of output, you have to fill it up with premium fuel, which is known as 95 RON here in Australia. But you can fill it up with cheaper fuel, but you're gonna have reduced performance of that motor, which means you'll have a slightly lower output and a slightly slower car. But for most of you, you're probably just going to fill it up with the cheaper stuff and just sacrifice the performance because you're not really buying this because you want a performance SUV. So this one here is the middle of the range Nissan X-Trail. It's called the STL, which means this thing will cost you over $54,000, or if you're looking at financing, it's going to cost you $253 a week according to Nissan's website. So that's something to think about, because if you don't need a hybrid system, you can get a slightly cheaper, pure petrol version of the X-Trail. That will cost you just over $50,000, but that will only cost you $180 a week. So there's a big difference to pay per week if you do want a hybrid powertrain. Now, the X-Trail STL does get a manual tailgate, so that is something you're sacrificing when you're saving a bit of money, but you can fit a lot, and I mean a lot of stuff back here, which is very useful, but you can't really fit anything underneath here because this does have an electric motor back here, which means you don't even get a actual spare tire. Instead, you just get a tire repair kit and your battery back here. But in the back here, you have doors that open pretty much to 90 degrees. I have heaps of room back here. You can slide these seats forwards, backwards, and even angle them. But here, this is the most comfortable, roomy position. I have heaps of knee room, a good amount of feet room, but not too much room underneath the seats in front of me. In this STL model, we have this nicer leather material. We have 2 USB ports. We have USB Type-C, USB Type-A, 2 air vents, and we have decent sized windows in the back. If you do have the cop middle seat, these seatbelt buckles really dig into your butt, so that's kind of annoying, but at least you have a decent amount of feet room for an SUV like this, seeing as the transmission and exhaust tunnel has been reduced quite a lot. And in terms of storage, you have some door bins, you have some map pockets, and you have 2 cup holders here and a place to like hold a phone or something like that. There's this vertical slot here, which is all I could see that being very useful for. Now we have keyless locking, unlocking, and a push button start. We get a smaller screen here, which I pretty much only use for Apple CarPlay or Android Auto if that's what you use, using a USB Type-C or a USB Type-A port up front. You've also got a 12-volt socket here, a bunch of physical controls for your climate controls. You've also got nice physical buttons for your screen here and physical tuner and volume knobs. You have nice materials up here. You have stitching on the dash. You have this plastic that's been made to look like a wood trim, which is way better than gloss black. There's no heads-up display in this model here, but we do have this contrasting softened plastics that running across the top of the dash and also on the doors, and it looks quite nice in here. It feels a little bit more premium, which is good. Unfortunately, we have limited room in the glove box because half of it's taken up by the fuse box there. We have a e-pedal button and also an EV button, which means you can put this car into a dedicated EV mode, and I'll talk about e-pedal when I'm driving. But first of all, let's talk about this shifter. It feels very cheap. I really don't like the feel of this thing, but it looks cool and it's very easy to operate. We have some drive modes here for your terrain modes, and we even have some storage here in the center console here. We have a leather wrap material steering wheel, so that feels nice. Plenty of physical buttons, and we have 2 analog dials with a screen in between. We don't have a fully digital dashboard like you'll get in the more expensive X-Trails. And also the construction here feels really solid as well for the price point, so that's a good thing. And we have a telescopically adjustable steering wheel, so it's all very normal in here, but the driving experience is far from normal. Before I jump into what I like about the driving experience and what I don't like about it, let's talk about the power figures. So this thing has 3 motors on board, but it's making under 200 kilowatts, so it's not producing a huge amount of power. Now, it's obviously an all-wheel drive system, and it's a very unique driving experience. This is just so bizarre to have an engine that turns on and off whenever the car decides it needs to, and you're not in control of that, the car is, but instead you're in control of the throttle input, which can dictate when that engine goes on. You can see your battery gauge, which moves up and down. I've never seen it full. I've only seen it as max as 3/4 full, but you can see that move up and down all the time. And this thing is really smooth thanks to a eCVT gearbox as well. And it just doesn't change gears. It's super smooth. It's basically an electric car driving experience, but then you get rudely interrupted by a petrol motor sound that happens underneath the bonnet in front of you. 3 things I love about the driving experience would be just how smooth it is. It's seamless to integrate a petrol motor as a generator and have these electric motors driving the car. It really does feel like an electric car that just so happens to be powered by petrol. Number 2, it's a very comfortable driving experience. This has very soft suspension, it has very light steering. This thing is not designed to be an engaging, sporty SUV. It is simply designed for efficiency, and driving this day to day, it's very comfortable. And the 3rd thing I love about the driving experience is the regenerative braking. It's a very unique driving experience. Some hybrids in this class do have that experience, but here it's very aggressive. We have an E-pedal mode, which is activated right now, and we can put the gearbox into B mode, and now we are 1-pedal driving, which is pretty cool. You do have to activate the brake at lower speeds, but for most speeds you're able to drive around and just lift off the throttle, and the car will decelerate a lot more rapidly than a traditional petrol or hybrid car. Now, my fuel savings have been pretty good. This thing has been saving me around 6.6 liters per 100 kilometers, which is very good. I've just gotten out of a Volvo XC40, which is a mild hybrid 4-cylinder small SUV. That's all-wheel drive, and that was claiming figures around 9 liters per 100 kilometers according to my trip computer. So here, this is definitely making a noticeable fuel saving for another small SUV that happens to be a hybrid, except this one is very unique. Now, the only thing I don't really like about the driving experience here is that petrol engine when it comes on. It can be very noisy at times, and then it'll dial back down. That's a very rare thing, but it's something that is annoying and that will remind you that you didn't get an electric car. But aside from that, this is pretty impressive as a setup. Now, servicing costs are on the higher side, so that is a price to pay for a more complicated engine setup here. But I will say, this is probably the best electric petrol hybrid I've tested. I'm really impressed with the fact that this doesn't have gears, this doesn't have any sort of rude interruption or weird integration between the petrol motor and the electric motor. Instead, it makes so much sense to have your petrol motor power your electric motors on board. But some things I don't love about the driving experience also include the fact this has not a whole bunch of sound deadening, so this gets very loud on the highway for a SUV, so those tire noise gets a little bit louder than I would like, and I would just prefer a bit more sound insulation in here. This is a heavier car, so I think they probably couldn't add too much more sound insulation before making this thing nearly 2 ton, because this already weighs over 1,700 kilograms with all the extra equipment on board. And that resulting extra weight does create a bit of a busy ride. That soft suspension is good for comfort, but it can mean that this car does tend to roll around a little bit on uneven surfaces. But I have to say, the fit and finish in here has been really nice. This car's done over 8,000 kilometers as a press vehicle, and it's holding up very well, so I'm pretty impressed there. I love the space this has. You have no issues throwing people in the second row and throwing bags in the back as well. This is super comfortable, super practical in that way. But why I really wanted to test this is because I've been seeing a lot of these out on the road, and I wonder why. And when you jump in, if you're gonna have a test drive of this thing, you're gonna put your foot down, you're gonna notice that instant acceleration, and that's really important for this car. It does feel like an electric car when you put your foot down. You can really just sort of feel the car sort of pick up the torque. It's got instant torque at 0 RPM, and then you've got that power generated by the petrol motor to help get you up to speed. This thing is not slow, but it's not very quick either. But it does feel responsive, which makes all the difference in the driving experience when comparing this to a regular petrol car. I used to only recommend Toyota hybrids, and I didn't really recommend anything else, but this is something I would absolutely recommend you check out if you are shopping for a Toyota or a Lexus hybrid.